Thank you, Leanne, and good morning all, and a very warm welcome to today's showcase of ICMA's Common Domain Model for Repo and Bonds. I'm delighted and actually rather excited today to be able to hold this event. As we all know, FinTech is one of the two overarching global themes in today's capital markets, the other, of course, being sustainability. And at ICMA, we approach FinTech from a variety of different perspectives. We've been discussing the digitization and the electronification of capital markets for many years now. But this is the first initiative that we've undertaken which contributes directly to digitizing common standards and best practice, practically assisting our members in their journey towards digitization through the creation of specific software code. And we're now at the end of the first phase of this project, which marks something of a milestone. As we all know, there's a proliferation of new FinTech initiatives and increased digitization in the bond and repo markets. And you may have seen that we've mapped many of these solutions in various mapping directories covering different market segments over the last couple of years. And we keep these updated constantly, and you'll find them on our website. But what has become clear is that it's essential to speak a common language in order to avoid fragmentation, to promote STP, to lay the foundation for new technologies, and to help our members prepare for ever-evolving regulatory requirements. And this is where the Common Domain Model comes in. The Common Domain Model, or CDM, is a digital representation of the life cycle events of certain financial products, a central repository and software code which will be largely open source. Our project is to add in the repo and the bond markets, thereby expanding the product scope of the CDM, which currently contains the derivatives and securities lending products. Over time and following adoption by market participants, we expect this to deliver industry-wide benefits. As mentioned, STP, interoperability amongst product components, and market efficiencies throughout the trading, clearing, and settlement cycles, all leading to lower operational costs and yielding efficiencies for the industry. We're now at the end of the first phase of this complex project, and the showcase today is an important step. But it is not enough simply to do the coding and create the repo and bond CDM. It will only be successful if there's widespread adoption and market participants are convinced enough of the future benefits to look into it in detail and start to incorporate it into their own infrastructures. And of course, this won't happen by itself, and it's going to take time, perhaps a number of years. But today's showcase starts the process by alerting the industry as to what is available, how it works, and the benefits this can bring. It is a journey, and we're looking forward to accompanying the industry in moving towards a good destination. No doubt there'll be many further discussions, a great deal more development along the way, and I hope that you find today's initial showcase helpful as a starting point. Before we get started, I just want to thank both ISDA and ISLA, who've already been working on the CDM for a long while for their own products. Many thanks indeed for the great cooperation and also the practical help that you've given us during the first phase of our project. And many thanks also to our partner REGnosys, from whom we'll be hearing shortly. And finally, I'd like also to thank those of our members on our CDM Steering Committee. It's been an intense 20 weeks, and your input has been extremely valuable. And with that, let me hand over to my colleague, Gabriel Carlson, who's been leading the work for ICMA. Over to you, Gabriel.
Thank you, Martin. My name is Gabriel Carlson. I'm responsible for FinTech and the international debt capital markets at ICMA, and I've been leading the CDM project for repo and bonds on behalf of ICMA's members. Today's event marks the conclusion of this project, at least of the initial phase. Next slide, please. First, I'll provide you with further background on the project, what the Common Domain Model is, and the expected benefits of speaking a common language or speaking CDM for the industry. REGnosys, who we partnered with, will then walk us through the modeling and integration tools of the CDM for repo and bonds. Tom Healy, who worked with us on this project, will then take us through a repo transaction, demonstrating how the transaction details are captured and translated by the CDM into a consistent data structure during its life cycle, from the trade execution to clearing and settlement. We will then be joined by members of ICMA CDM Steering Committee who will share their takeaways of the project, discuss implementation scenarios, and share views on potential next steps in a panel discussion. We will then open the floor for questions following the panel discussion. Next slide. First of all, I would like to thank again members of ICMA CDM Steering Committee who provided guidance throughout this project and committed time and effort. Next slide. The common domain model is essentially a common language for trade processing. It provides an unambiguous digital representation of lifecycle events and processes in the form of code. And what this means is that firms using the CDM will be able to see transactions in a consistent data structure. The CDM is able to translate messages in different protocols and formats, such as FIX, FPML, or ISO 20022. The model sits under the hood of trading and booking systems, middle and back office applications, or regulatory reporting solutions. And the aim of the demonstration today is to provide a practical insight into the key features and functionalities of the CDM that enable interoperability, automation, and innovation. Next slide. But let me first say a few words about the project. The objective was to extend the CDM, initially developed by ISDA for derivatives, to enable the full processing of a standard fixed-term repo, which is the most commonly transacted repo structure, as well as one transaction. And this lays the groundwork for other repo structures that would benefit from standardization. Importantly, the CDM has been designed for use in a production environment. We launched the project at the end of February and concluded this month, the focus being on execution, clearing, and settlement of a repo, but also plain vanilla bond transaction and the data points required for settlement. The CDM is designed for all market participants who are active in repo and bond markets, both sell-side and buy-side, but also market infrastructures, trading venues, CCPs, CSDs, and software vendor firms, providing automation systems, matching platforms, or regulatory reporting solutions, amongst others. Next slide. To complete this first phase, here's the approach that we have followed. As a first step, drawing up a conceptual model of a repo transaction, the processes and data points. And this is based on definitions of the Global Master Repurchase Agreement, which have been embedded into the model together with provisions from the ERCC Guide to Best Practice in the European repo market. Which means that when implementing the CDM, DRT or data specialists will have a manual for repo transactions that explains the structure of a repo and, for example, the concepts of purchase price, pricing or repo rate, haircut, or margin ratio. The model builds on anonymized sample transactions from CDM Steerco members to ensure that the model reflects reality and is compatible with existing messaging protocols and data standards. As part of this project, we've conducted a mapping of the FIX messaging protocol to the CDM so that transactions executed via FIX can automatically be translated into the CDM. The conceptual model has then been translated into a logical model, which means there are conditions and validation rules that help detect errors and reduce manual intervention during the life cycle. The model was then tested and validated, and the next step will be to make the CDM for repo and bonds publicly available in the near future. The CDM is an open source project. Next slide. Now, what are the expected benefits of the CDM? The first is interoperability. As a common language, the CDM enables systems to communicate more easily, reducing friction and fragmentation. The CDM also fosters automation. As a digital standard, it can increase efficiency of trade processing, reducing the need for manual intervention to reconcile transaction details, but also facilitate regulatory reporting. New solutions equally build on standardization, which the CDM enables by providing an unambiguous representation of trade events and processes. For example, when interfacing with new technologies, such as distributed ledgers. But importantly, the CDM is a cross-industry initiative between ICMA, ISDA, and ISLA, and builds on industry consensus covering bond and repo, securities lending, and derivatives markets. It is aligned with ICMA's mission to promote resilient and well-functioning international debt capital markets. And ultimately, this will deliver cost savings and enable new revenue opportunities. Next slide. To realize the benefits of the CDM, adoption is critical. The CDM is machine readable and executable and can be implemented as part of a replatforming exercise or system upgrades, for example, to increase efficiency or prepare for regulatory reporting requirements. It can also be used to digitize processes and enter new electronic markets. Or in the absence of legacy technology, the CDM can also be leveraged to establish new infrastructures and applications, for example, in emerging markets or frontier markets. We have published 2 fact sheets with the support of the CDM Steering Committee to provide a high-level overview of the CDM and address practical questions from an implementation perspective. Next slide. Thank you for your attention. In addition to the 2 fact sheets, there are further resources available on our website. But let us now move on to the CDM demonstration by Said Atarian and Nigel Cobb from REGnosys, and then Tom Healy from FinSys. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel, for the introduction, and good morning, everybody. In this session, we're going to introduce REGnosys, how the CDM has been extended for repo and bonds, followed by a demonstration of the Rosetta platform. But firstly, let us introduce ourselves. I am Nigel Cobb, Senior Data Modeler at REGnosys, and I'm responsible for partnering with our clients on the continued development of the common domain model.
And I am Said Atarian, Data Modeler at REGnosys. I'm responsible for the development of securities finance components of the CDM.
Over the last 4 months, REGnosys has partnered with ICMA and a working group of experts from the industry to successfully extend the CDM for the repo and bonds market. This has been achieved through leveraging and enhancing existing model components, as well as extending the model to include additional market-specific concepts where required. The end-to-end demonstration will illustrate how the concepts that have been developed can be implemented in a front-to-back workflow across the key lifecycle events of execution, settlement, and the clearing. You will also see how the tooling provided by REGnosys can ease the cost of adoption through providing a translation engine that facilitates interoperability across platforms and organizations. What is the CDM? The purpose of the CDM as a digital model for the representation of products, calculations, and events has already been articulated by Gabriel. The CDM should not be considered a new standard, but more the consolidation of existing standards. It facilitates interoperability between existing platforms and data formats through the provision of translation functionality. It also accelerates adoption through validation and processing logic, bringing consistency to the representation of events across the market. And the demonstration you will see illustrates how this can be achieved. But before we look into the repo and bond model in further detail, we'd like to take a moment to introduce REGnosys. REGnosys is a regulatory technology company whose mission is to transform the relationship between investment firms and their regulators. We leverage cloud technology and the power of open source software to digitize the global framework for collecting and reporting regulatory data. To this end, we've developed a data modeling platform called Rosetta. At a high level, Rosetta is made of 3 components. These are, firstly, the Rosetta domain-specific language, the DSL, which is the syntax used to describe the model. Secondly, the model repository, which houses the CDM and is free to access under applicable license terms. And finally, Rosetta, which provides the functionality to develop the model and test and deploy implementations of the CDM. The community edition of Rosetta is freely available to any market participants. And it's the tool that the ICMA working group has used to validate the model. At the start of the engagement, REGnosys and ICMA agreed a set of goals and objectives to be delivered over the course of the initial engagement. The main objectives were as follows: to model the main product features of a basic repo and basic bond product, to model the definition of a fixed interest rate term repo transaction, to model the definition of a bond transaction, including the data points required for settlement, to model the definition of the initial settlement function and the inputs that support the settlement lifecycle event, to model the definition of the clearing function and the inputs that support the clearing lifecycle event, and to model the definition of the final settlement function and the inputs that support the repurchase lifecycle event. The performance of the model would then be demonstrated through the running of events on the platform using some sample transaction data, and to support the testing and implementation of applications of the model by market participants. The completion of these goals and objectives allows a conceptual end-to-end process to be put together, representing a simple workflow for a repo transaction. The conceptual model of an end-to-end process can be divided into three main areas per our goals and objectives for the pilot: execution, clearing, and settlement of cleared or non-cleared workflow. And firstly, we're going to look at settlement. The transaction model in the CDM is used to describe the execution of a transaction. This is a business event which contains all the terms required to describe the repo agreement that the parties have entered into. Following execution, the next lifecycle event for a repo transaction is initial settlement. The CDM provides a function that programmatically generates the required output of a settlement event. Given an execution and transfer instructions, which describe the trade component that should be settled, the CDM programmatically generates the instructions to transfer the cash and securities that's required by entering into the repo transaction. Through existing industry infrastructure, the physical movement of cash and collateral is achieved. Once complete, the CDM workflow can be used to mark the repo as settled. For the repurchase of a repo transaction, the CDM provides a function that programmatically calculates the repurchase amount and generates the required output of a repurchase event. Given an execution and repurchase instructions, which describe the trade to be returned and the associated date, the CDM programmatically calculates the repurchase amount and generates the instructions to transfer the cash and securities that's required by completing the repo transaction. Through existing industry infrastructure, the physical movement of cash and collateral is achieved. And once completed, the CDM workflow can be used to mark the repo as closed. Similarly, for clearing, the CDM provides a function that programmatically generates the required output for the clearing event. Given an execution and clearing instructions, which describe the clearinghouse and clearing parties, CDM programmatically generates the creation of clear trades for a novation or open offer clearing model. In conclusion, over the last 4 months, since ICMA began development on the CDM for repo and bonds, there is now a model in which a repurchase agreement can be defined transactionally, executed and settled, cleared via novation or open offer, repurchased in full, and a bond transaction can be defined transactionally. During today's demonstration, we'll be looking at an execution, a settlement, and the clearing of a repo transaction, simulating the real-life end-to-end workflow. During the course of the engagement, it has been possible to implement a flow where a fixed message can be translated into the CDM format, demonstrating how industry adoption is a realistic and achievable goal. Next, we would like to demonstrate how the Rosetta platform provides the tools to develop the CDM and to then test and deploy the model across the industry.
Rosetta is a cloud-based application which is accessible through a web browser. It is used to view, edit, and use the common domain model. Here, we are viewing an extension to the CDM for repo and bonds, which is a private environment only accessible by permissioned users, containing the CDM model extensions that have been developed as part of the initial engagement. This is the graphical view of the CDM in Rosetta Core. The graphical view shows an equity relationship diagram of the model components in the CDM. It can be used to review and navigate the hierarchy of the data model. Through the collaboration of participants on the ICMA CDM Steering Group, the Security Finance Payouts, previously developed with ISLA has been modified in the model to describe the movement of cash and securities in a repo transaction. This allows key terms of a repo product to be specified, such as the collateral, the purchase dates, the repurchase date of the repo, and relevant margin and haircut provisions. The CDM is designed based on the concept of composability and reusability of data elements. Because of this, in many instances, it has been possible to leverage existing model components for derivatives and securities lending. Market-specific naming conventions can be incorporated into the CDM to provide reference to legal and industry best practice documentations. This is the validation view of the CDM in Rosetta Core. This view allows a user to test a model object by running a set of applicable rules on it. This is to ensure an input object is compliant with the model standards. The tooling allows the user to review the input file and see any data validation errors identified. Let's review a sample repo transaction. This sample demonstrates how a repo transaction execution would be represented using the CDM. The format of data structure allows the transaction to be inspected by each key component, such as parties to the transaction, including party roles to define the buyer and seller, price and quantities, or product terms. This is the visualization view of the CDM in Rosetta Core. This view allows a user to simulate a business process and visualize how a model object is defined after applying the CDM functional model. The visualization window shows the relationship between the key data components in the output message. Let's review the repo settlement function. This view demonstrates how the CDM can automate the workflow of settlement of a repo transaction. Based on an input execution, the required transfer of cash and collateral at the initiation of a trade can be automatically created. In this example, the CDM workflow model is used to propose the settlement of a new repo transaction. When the settlement is complete, a business event is generated consisting of a security and cash movement with associated transfer history. The seller is delivering security to the buyer, and in return, the buyer is delivering cash to the seller, which is inclusive of a haircut. If your technology systems don't already speak CDM, don't worry. Rosetta comes with a suite of tools designed to lower costs of adoption. Data mappings can be created, tested, and deployed directly in the application to provide an integration layer with your systems. As your systems or the CDM change, a comprehensive test pack will help identify gaps ahead of any upgrades. And all data translation functionalities are accessible via API. This feature is going to be used as part of the demonstrations you are going to see today. This concludes the demonstration.
Tom Healy, founder-director of consultancy FinSys, will now walk us through a repo transaction, demonstrating how the trade details are captured and translated by the CDM during the life cycle of a repo.
Good morning, and thank you for attending this showcase event on the common domain model for repo and bonds. My name is Tom Healy. I'm a financial services consultant. I specialize in product development and digitalization of capital markets. I've been assisting the ICMA and REGnosys on the design and development of the repo and bond CDM over the past few months. As you've seen and heard from the REGnosys team, the CDM is an important advancement in establishing a working digital model for financial products to be traded, cleared, and settled across platforms, trading partners, venues, and settlement systems. The common domain model is a standardized machine-readable and machine-executable blueprint for how financial products are traded, managed across transaction lifecycle that will enhance financial markets' operational efficiency by enabling interoperability, accelerating innovation, promoting transparency for better regulatory oversight. Initiatives such as this also serve to lower transaction costs and improve liquidity in the markets. Based on my own experiences at banks and financial services firms, the Rosetta platform is the first open domain model platform of its type for capital markets that can support industry participation in the development of a working model that generates executable code that can be integrated across many platforms by speaking a common language. You've seen that the CDM contains objects and executable business events. For example, creation of a trade, clearing a trade, and settling a trade. If you're familiar with data modeling in software systems, you'll understand what I mean here by an object. If you're not, a CDM object is essentially a software data structure that contains all the relevant data and functions that represent a logical real-world object, such as an asset or a transaction. To demonstrate this functionality in the real environment, I'm going to demonstrate the events using a prototype repo execution platform built in Excel with an interface to the repo and bond CDM hosted by REGnosys. In this demo, I'm using real data to generate real-time transactions and messaging between platforms. So I had previously described a workflow scenario that I'll use for the demo. This represents the workflow that is very similar to what any bank, venue, settlement system will do when processing an order and a trade. In this scenario, dealers in the market have posted buy and sell orders onto the electronic venue. The first action taken by the seller is to execute the repo transaction, is to hit the bid in the order book and execute the repo trade. The flow after execution will be to register the trade with the CCP and then settle the trade. In the upper right screen, we have the venue order book with bids and offers that I'll use to initiate the execution. On the left is the post-trade ticket that will show the executed trade and status throughout the lifecycle. On the bottom of the screen is the event panel where the business events from the CDM are posted. The clearing and settlement actions would not be relevant for a trader to see on the front end, but I've included these actions for the demo. In most cases, post-trade ticketing, clearing, and settlement would happen without any manual intervention, but it's possible that middle or back office personnel would manually initiate clearing and settlement processing. I'll be initiating these events manually. So we see here an overnight repo on a underlying UK gilt of July of 22 at a repo bid rate of 0.15. The repo object was the result of calling the CDM business event create tradable product that was previously described, and we can see here represented in a JSON format. This represents the tradable repo product that includes the necessary data elements of a basic repo transaction, such as the product definition, the effective date, the end date, the counterparty, security references, price, rates, and amounts. The important aspect of this repo structure is that it shares the same structure and elements as other financial products supported by the CDM, such as the economic terms, the payout information, the prices, and the quantities. The next step will be to use the CDM object to execute an order by generating a fixML message that is sent to the CDM where it's converted into a full instance of the model. It was an important effort of this project to create a fixed ML ingestion service so that the CDM can communicate with other platforms using fixed messaging. Here I'll execute the order. We can now see the trade ticket, which shows the amount that was executed, the start date and end date, the repo rate, the counterparty being the CCP, the venue, the amount at settlement, which is the purchase price, the interest, and then the repurchase price. And the current status of this trade is booked. We'll continue using the same CDM object to register the trade with the CCP. We can now see on the event blotter that the CDM event create cleared trade was called. We can see on the CCP blotter that the trade has now been split into two separate trades where the CCP will step in the middle and be the counterparty to both sides of the trade. You can also see the resulting response from the CDM indicating the cleared trade event. The next step will be to settle the trade by the CCP. For this demo, I'll initiate the create settlement business event. Here we can see on the event blotter that the create settlement business event was called. And we can see on the settlement blotter that both legs of the trade have now been recorded as settled, and the status of the trade indicates that the trade has been settled. And the response object that we receive back from the CDM of the settlement event. We've now completed the full life cycle of the trade from order creation to execution to clearing and finally settlement. While this is a fairly basic example, it demonstrates the reusability of the CDM objects across platforms and applications and across the complete life cycle of the trade. As shown earlier, many repo-specific business events were created for this project, but at the same time, the repo transaction workflow made use of many functions and business events already developed by the prior ISDA and ISLA CDM projects, and through contributions of various members. The structure of the CDM for repo will in the future be able to support more complex repo transactions in industry workflows. Thank you, and please reach out to anyone on the project with any questions. We'll now return to the live presentation of this showcase event.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed to Saeed and Nigel and the rest of our partners at REGnosys for your demonstration. And also thank you also to Tom for your demonstration as well. And thank you very much for your help during the course of this project as a consultant. Very, very helpful indeed. We'd now like to move into the panel discussion. I want to introduce again Gabriel Carlson. Gabriel is a director in our market practice and regulatory policy area. As we've heard, he's been leading this project, and he's going to be introducing his panel and moderating the questions. Over to you, Gabriel.
Yes, thank you, Martin. I'm delighted that members of our CDM Steering Committee have joined us today for this panel discussion. And I suggest we start with a brief round of introductions, starting with Barclays.
Hi, my name's Andy Diplock. I'm a director on the Prime Services Fixed Income Financing Desk in EMEA. I've been working in the repo markets for about 10 years, looking at collateral management and IT and infrastructure development.
Eurex?
Yes, good morning, everybody. I'm Geraldine. I work in the fixed income funding and finance area of Eurex. I'm responsible for the business development of securities finance products, and that covers the range of Eurex Repo as the trading venue and Eurex Clearing as the central counterparty.
Thank you. And also Intesa Sanpaolo.
Hello, everyone. I'm Andrea Prampolini, and my role is Head of Financial Markets Analytics and Digital Solutions in the IMI Corporate and Investment Banking Division at Intesa Sanpaolo. And my team is responsible for delivering front office proprietary software solutions for our global markets business.
Thank you. And over to ISDA.
Hi, my name is Rodney Vincent. I'm director at ISDA and in data and digital solutions. And I'm responsible for project managing the CDM initiatives at ISDA.
Over to JP Morgan.
Yeah, hi, Nick Hamilton. I'm a global operations lead at JP Morgan, focusing on strategic change management for middle office. And I also co-chair the ICMA European Repo and Collateral Council Operations Committee.
Great, over to TradeWeb.
Good morning, Paul Jones. I'm a repo product manager at TradeWeb. I was a repo trader for 20 plus years and have spent the last 5+ years developing a repo platform and hopefully trying to electronify the repo market.
Okay, thank you. Well, turn to you, Nick, as co-chair of the ERCC operations group. What are your key takeaways from this initial phase of the CDM project from a repo and securities perspective?
Yes, thanks, Gabriel. I suppose to set the scene, I think from an institutional and committee perspective, I mean, we'd be very supportive of the work here to help us join the dots across a rapidly evolving data environment. I mean, just I suppose touching on sort of Paul's kind of headlines, is that the shape of the actual product and the post-trade services has rapidly accelerated in recent years. And we wanted to focus on solutions to help navigate the landing of these more efficiently. So previously there's been a lot of work anchored on the GMRA Guide to Best Practice for Event Management, and I think the steering committee feels that this now allows us to get a more focused digital representation of the product and process. And as was highlighted in the demo, that this helps kind of reduce some of the subjectivity in interpretation. And industry-wise, there's been a lot of work on trying to establish consistency on messaging. And I think generally, I think the feeling's been that this has landed reasonably effectively, but very much in the respective community processes, i.e. regulatory reporting, clearing, settlement, all the specific post-trade services. And I think that's further kind of validated where we've got these gatherings of FIX or SWIFT or ISO kind of data modeling components, and Rosetta gives us that capability in terms of translation of inputs and outputs. We feel this is very much a progressive exercise, and I mean, institutionally at JP Morgan, to move this forward, I think it's been important for us to ensure we've had the right folks around the table to really progress the alignment and thinking around the common domain model. We wanted to evangelize that over the last kind of 6 months or so as we really stood up the use cases, and to be successful there, we've had to bring together sort of data architecture, technology and operations groups together with the support of the business to partner on the steering and development of the mapping work. And I think that's given us a strong foundation to build on. And then to answer the point specifically around the opportunities, then this is where we feel we can start to kind of leverage the capabilities to standardize the product and help more consistent outcomes, and not just the current products, but there's a rapidly evolving kind of layer of new product and processes coming into the market as well, and having a strong foundation within the CDM, it should give us the opportunity to build and be a little bit more nimble in terms of the execution of those.
Right, thank you, Nick. I think you mentioned that joining the dots has been one of the challenges or one of the important elements for this project, which also means bringing together the right people for this. From Barclays' perspective, Barclays has been involved in the CDM since its inception. Andy, what are your takeaways from this first phase?
I think, definitely for Barclays, one of the key takeaways is how much the CDM can help the markets going forward. The repo market in particular has been historically fairly slow to adapt and to change. And particularly for a market where the volumes of transactions are so high, I think it's very, very important for people to be speaking the same language, sending and receiving data in a common format without the need for lots of different sort of reconciliations and interpretations to happen along the way will help massively in enabling repo to take advantage of developments. So all these, like the offerings being put forward by various fintechs and things like that in the future, having the common domain model, everyone talking the same language, the data being standardized, will help in getting the different participants in the industry up and running on these, which can obviously just help the industry overall take advantage of all these different product offerings, increase liquidity, help people manage capital, things like that. All of this, I think, will be helped enormously by sort of more widespread adoption of the common domain model.
Right, I think you make an important link between, on the one hand, the technical aspect of consistency of data and being able to speak a common language, but also the impact it has on the business in terms of increasing liquidity.
Yeah.
Now, from an Intesa Sanpaolo perspective, you have been exploring the CDM not only within this work stream, but you've been experimenting previously. What are your thoughts on this first phase?
Thank you, Gabriel. Yeah, let me say that first, I'm really grateful for this initiative by ICMA on extending the foundation work on the common domain model to this key part of the global infrastructure. Clearly, an essential step towards this digitization of the trade life cycle management is promoting interoperable standard. And what we know is that today life cycle modeling is extremely entity specific, and even two institutions using the same commercial software will have implemented different model of the trade life cycle. In addition, bonds and repos are the core of treasury operations, financial leverage, but also collateral management and credit support solutions. So in general, it's great to see this kind of cooperation among industry bodies on developing the common standards. And I think that the benefits are evident already, because as Nick mentioned, the landscape is evolving rapidly, and we need to join forces to meet the challenge, really.
Thank you, Andrea. We've heard the perspectives from repo market participants, but clearly market infrastructures have an important role to play. From a trading venue's perspective, Paul, what are your key takeaways from this first phase of the CDM?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can agree that the repo market has been a bit of a laggard and a slow adopter of electronic solutions, but I think we're starting to see that change. So, for example, to quote some statistics, TradeWeb, the balances on a TradeWeb have increased about 70% year on year. So I think and the number of dealers and clients has moved a lot. So I think there's a pretty wide recognition now that to move things electronically really is really the only solution moving forward from a cost point of view and also from a reporting point of view. So I think the CDM potentially comes at a very opportune time, and hopefully will act as a catalyst, because there's no doubt that there's a lot of, whilst the CDM so far has modeled a fairly standard transaction, there ahead of us there are a whole lot of other types of transactions and problems which require common solutions. So I think the CDM is hopefully a way for the industry to come together and identify what those solutions are, because there's no doubt that electronification does require standardization, and the CDM will give us an opportunity to work together and do that. And certainly standardization, looking at it from the other direction, is an enabler of automation.
Right. Gerald, from your perspective, and having been involved in our steering committee, but also in the ISDA and ISLA work streams, would you agree with these points, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that from a trading venue and a CCP perspective. Believe the standardization element is very crucial to how we operate and manage our business. The financial markets have undergone a massive transformation in the last few years. Firstly, from a regulatory point of view, and then secondly, and currently from a technology point of view. As you can see from what's happened in the derivatives world, as well as broaderly in the securities finance world, we've had EMIR and SFTR, and then we're going to currently we'll have the impact of CSDR as well, and then we will have other financial regulations more to do with sustainable finance and climate risk coming into the picture as well. What I'm aiming at here is if the the common standardization is adopted and adopted quickly than has been in the past, then I think whole market infrastructure can adapt in a far easier and quicker way. There'll be less reliance on legacy systems, which I think is crucial because that's time consuming and expensive. And ultimately, the downstream effect of reporting, whether that's back to market participants or whether that's reporting to vendors or regulators as well, if common standards are used, common terminology is applied, then it becomes far more accessible to all of the market. And I believe, and just echoing the thoughts of Andy and Paul have said, you know, anything that encourages the greater adoption of electronic trading and ultimately central clearing as well, makes the entire range of financial markets across the products a lot more efficient and more cost effective.
I think that's an important point to make, that, of course, the CDM project like the CDM requires widespread adoption. And this is one of the most important aspects, actually, when we think about the CDM and the implementation. And from your perspective, in terms of implementation scenarios, where do you see the CDM being implemented? And in addition to that, what are the actual requirements from an organizational perspective to do that? And from a Barclays perspective, where would you see the implementation scenarios and requirements?
And I think it's something where I think there needs to be something to initiate that adoption by the various institutions. So I'm thinking that adoption by an FMI, so someone like DTCC or LCH or something like that would assist in sort of encouraging the take up of the CDM. So applying that to a particular offering would help the industry sort of see the benefits of taking up this, because I do understand it's a fairly major change, and it requires sort of a fair degree of take up for it to gain sort of critical mass, for everyone to start seeing the benefits, and for it to be sort of universally recognized as something which is going to drive the industry forward, help the banks, help the industry members save money, help them improve efficiency, and bring the benefits to the market. I know that when the ISDA CDM was put in place, there were some events like hackathons and things like that put in place, which seemed to help with the take up, showing the benefits, giving people a chance to get involved and to just get stuck into the new framework, and obviously raising the publicity and showing everyone what those benefits are.
That's an important aspect, and ICMA has been participating in these hackathons previously, but clearly this is a good opportunity to raise awareness on the CDM. Although in this current COVID-19 context and everything being virtual, it's of course not as easy, but hopefully we will have an opportunity to do that. Andrea, from your perspective, given your operations in Italy, across Europe, and the interaction with different systems, settlement systems, where do you see the implementation perspective for the CDM and then the actual organizational requirements?
I think there were a great comment by Andy. I think we will start from the fact that the word implementation in my mind is associated with the word cost. So clearly here the final objective is operational efficiency. So we need to foster adoption by keeping costs low. So let's say a first hurdle for in this respect is the translation from existing representations. So here, I think that a possible solution would be building a community of participants around Rosetta to extend what works out of the box. If you have a hurdle, an initial cost to translate your existing representation into CDM, this could discourage people from trying and from meeting the benefits of the potential of this protocol. So hackathons, yeah, when possible, should I mean they were really a great way to kickstart this. Second step, I think, is once the objects are available in the CDM format, then the next step is to automate reconciliation, I think, among internal software silos. As you know, we are experimenting for a couple of years now with distributed ledger technology, and namely Corda, to achieve that. And I think the results are really promising. You know, I don't think I need to convince anybody of how, you know, synchronizing business events representation and exception management would create benefits and cost savings opportunities for our institutions. And then the end goal is really interoperability among institutions. And here I totally agree with Andy, encouraging market infrastructure to really back the project with possibly an implementation roadmap, as this could create the momentum we need for adoption.
I think these are very important points. On the one hand, the application of, you know, interfacing with new technologies, which of course offer a huge potential in terms of operational efficiency. There's of course the cost that you mentioned that needs to be low to foster adoption. And there's of course then the interoperability aspect. Nick, from your perspective, from a forward-looking perspective, but also the operational aspects, where do you see the implementation scenarios of the CDM?
Well, I think there are several opportunities. I think one, I think it was raised, a point earlier raised just in terms of the normalization feature when firms start to externalize their data into market process and infrastructure. That could be a lot, you know, a bit more of a kind of a binary journey, you know, based on kind of FMI adoption. But it's certainly a feature point to many organizations today in terms of what that translation and normalization feature looks like. And now that we have a much clearer product domain for repo, then there's a natural pivot for that work. And I think we should clarify that this exercise, is very, very much collaborative with kind of ISLA and ISDA in terms of derivative sec lending. But whilst there are whilst there's similarities, the products aren't the same. And I think this initial phase has certainly highlighted, what those the differentiation in constructs are, and that's important. Back to what my preamble around, making sure that we've got strong foundations to allow us to accelerate the events as they arise. So it could be infrastructure. We get quite excited about some of the kind of tokenization and kind of digital kind of aspects to the journey here as well. Now for that, that's been more of a kind of a whiteboard, not just for the steering group but for the industry. So where it gets interesting is to link CDM in terms of establishing new standards and getting a more consistent format and reducing that time that time to market, and also kind of preventing some of the kind of the Wild West approach, where we end up with many different nodes having to be established to and connect to, which which is clearly will be heavy on the operations, technology, and the business in terms of where that leads in the medium to long term. So I think there are a couple of threads there as well, and I think that'll kind of shape up in the as we start to frame the outcomes of the next phase of the work.
Right. Yes, I think collaboration is an important keyword. I think it's been a great collaboration with ISDA and ISLA on the CDM, but of course, as you mentioned, going through the project, the initial phase, it also highlighted the differences between derivatives, securities lending, and repos and bonds, and some adjustments we have had to make to the model to ensure that it is fit for purpose. And of course, this then opens up new opportunities that you mentioned in terms of tokenization. Looking on a bit across the board from an ISDA perspective, given that the CDM has been around now for a few years, it has been made available a couple of years ago, and market participants have been actively contributing and working with it. Rudy, what is your experience when it comes to adoption of the CDM for derivatives?
Thank you, Gabriel. Well, I think a few key points have already been called out in terms of the requirements for facilitating implementations. I think recognizing some of the key pain points for better automations, better standardizations in processes like clearing, settlement, processes related to collateral. Andrea mentioned about reconciliations. Recognizing where the pain points are is the first step. Second step we've learned is that, well, we need a data model, and we need product model, event model. We learned that we needed the ability to express business logic. So that's part of the core model that has been looked into, and certainly this journey with ISLA looking at securities product as well. Another ingredients, and that's been mentioned, is the collaborations mechanisms with bringing all the market SMEs to the table to understand, okay, how do we mutualize that knowledge and experience to representing those financial transactions. And finally, I think it was called upon that concrete use cases and concrete opportunities to demonstrate the value proposition CDM in these collaborative efforts, whether it's via the term of pilots, whether in terms of hackathons, but ultimately looking at opportunities that are scalable, where the benefits for mutualized data model and make sense. And we've seen these requirements very much manifesting themselves, and as a result, we've seen an interesting engagement from market incumbents looking at those different areas, interoperability, automations, looking at innovative technologies, and trying to understand the opportunity for cross-industry collaboration. So we've seen that. I can speak perhaps of 3 areas. One is application to regulatory reporting, understanding that if we bring this mutual effort together, then we can digitize regulatory rules. We can produce machine executable logic and libraries that can aid the validations of implementations, and they can possibly accelerate the implementation response from financial institutions. We've seen that in the context of EMIR, MIFIR, but also upcoming regulations such as EMIR refits and CFTC rewrite. We are looking into this now with the help of several organizations. Also applicable to SFTR. So this is really the power of CDM to be extensible across multiple regime, multiple jurisdictions. We looked also into the Monetary Authority of Singapore reporting. So very much a very vast opportunity to apply the potential of CDM and accelerate implementations. Another areas we've looked at is the legal agreement, digitization of legal agreements. So they are manifesting themselves as PDF, but not necessarily very helpful to support the downstream processes. So I think we can anticipate the CDM to support the operational the representation of a legal agreement that support the performance of financial transactions, and the corresponding standardizations of the specific set of information that these documents contain. I can pick on the credit support annex for initial margining or variation margining, but you can also have a similar example for GMSLA.
Right.
Ultimately, this is usable across the board.
Right, very interesting aspects that you mentioned, Rudy. On the one hand, the current work that ISDA has been doing on reporting. This is, of course, an important topic for the industry, one that we haven't particularly focused within this first phase, but clearly a consistent data model and structure with these automation capabilities will be able to help comply with future requirements, which are ever evolving. Without a doubt, there's going to be a review of SFTR, there's MiFID on the horizon and MiFIR on the horizon, and even more so with the divergence between the UK and the EU. So clearly, this consistency will be an important factor. And digitization of legal agreements, without a doubt, this is probably not yet in the 21st century entirely, and there are also opportunities there. Now, we've heard often the point about market infrastructures, and to turn to you, Paul, from a trading venue perspective, where do you see the opportunities for implementation, bearing in mind that as a trading venue, there's not only repos on your platform, but also many other products?
Yeah, I mean, looking at this more simple stage, I think having spent a number of years dealing with a large number of different dealers and clients and different systems they use and different OMSs, I think, as Andrea said, the initial challenge for us, which we can get traction on, is basically interoperability. The greater the interoperability there is, then everything can move forward. And I think that's from any kind of platform or trading venue, whether it's TradeWeb, whoever. I think that's the key to this, the capacity to be able to do STPs, and even if it's pre-trade interoperability as well. But certainly STP is key.
Yes, that seems to be one of the common themes for the CDM. Gerard, would you agree with that? What are your points? What are your thoughts on the implementation scenarios, given your, as mentioned previously, given you've been involved in the different CDM work streams?
Yes, I totally agree with the comments there, and the work that ISLA and ISDA have done. They're probably a little more advanced on certain aspects. If you break down the whole, not just repo but derivatives and securities lending transactions into 4 different or 5 different segments, where at the starting point you've got the legal agreements, then you've got trade execution, the instruction, and then you've got settlement, and then you go leading on to collateral and risk management. Each one of those on its own is a huge stream to adapt and adopt to a common domain model. So some work has been more advanced than others, and I think the benefit is adopting functionality and aligned terminology across products. So we're seeing that emerge, certainly with ISLA and ISDA, as far as some of the collateral management work that's being done. And that will almost certainly come into play more on the repo and the bond side. So we can certainly see benefits across that, and the work and the working groups and the committees I've been involved in. I mean, it just goes to show that there is a very valuable opportunity to streamline all of these post-trade and pre-trade functions. I mean, ultimately, as everybody said on this panel, it will deliver multiple efficiencies across the value chain. And I agree, interoperability is also a key point, as you need to transfer this information across venues, across counterparties, and all the way down to regulatory reporting as well. So I think it's crucial that the work and the cooperation continues, and you know, to increase the opportunity to make sure that further adoption is obtained on a large scale.
Absolutely, and that's an important point in terms of interoperability and, of course, the adoption on a large scale. Collateral management, I think, is a very good keyword. It's a very important aspect, and obviously one of the cross-cutting themes if we look at our area, at the repo markets and bonds, but also in the derivative space and securities lending, and other ongoing initiatives in terms of ISO 20022. And I wonder, Nick, from your perspective, what is your view on this, on the potential to further the harmonization agenda with the CDM and contributing and joining the dots between these different initiatives?
I've recently seen some matrices which have kind of framed the different kind of message formats across the kind of the verticals and the horizontals. I suppose what I mean vertical, I mean from kind of execution through to clearing and settlement, and kind of the horizontals into regulatory reporting in some of the internal and kind of external representation of product and life cycle. And, you know, there are something in the region of half a dozen sort of different, you know, kind of formats, you know, within the respective kind of products and process profiles. So I think the foundation work here is done is sort of level set that in terms of you know, fix. If we look at the ISO and the SWIFT layers as well, then there's certainly, you know, ripe for further translation and input into Rosetta. I think the rapid focus in Europe on the 20022 storyboard and the narrative for securities is probably an important feature point in the medium term. And, you know, and I think I should just highlight that actually we've come quite a long way in terms of, you know, setting that up for that journey, you know, in terms of the modelling of repo and bond product, transaction model, the clearing and settlement model. Now they've all been established now, and I suppose it's up for the and I think that's that's where the conversations are starting to evolve now in terms of what's next. And the ISO 2002 piece would probably take us deeper into clearing and settlement, and that would need some of the FMI kind of commitment. And across the horizontal, I suppose it's the willingness in terms of perhaps some of the refit around the regulatory reporting at the moment in terms of institutional processing in terms of the opportunity.
Right, that's an important topic, and yeah, different opportunities. That's on a kind of vertical level or horizontal, as you pointed out. And as Rudy mentioned, this is an ongoing effort at ISDA on the collateral side, and there's certainly, I think, scope to collaborate in that respect, to ensure that collateral management of repos is taken into account, and also to take into account the differences, whether it's in terms of terminology, but also in terms of practices that need to be reflected. Now, looking ahead, we've just completed the first phase, and we've spoken about the implementation scenarios. Implementation adoption of the CDM is going to be rather not a short-term possibility, but something in the medium or long term, which is part of a broader change management and digital transformation agenda. But looking ahead, what would you like to see as next steps following the conclusion of this initial phase? Andrea.
Thanks. So I think the priority work really now is on extending and consolidating the model, because maturity and stability are essential for use in production, which is what we want. Okay. The other point is clearly we need to avoid becoming a niche solution, for example, for a particular asset class or for a specific segment of the life cycle. So here really we need to keep it modular. We need to keep it really open to the contributions and the nature of the different stakeholders for specific products. And finally, I think we need to let the participants meet in a community built around protocol translation resources, which is something that I think could keep the cost of entry low.
And that is an important aspect, and I think this is where we can build already on a community around the CDM, but clearly there is scope for more to be done. Andy, from a Barclays perspective, what should be the next steps following this initial phase? Where should the focus be?
Well, I think as well as sort of publicizing and getting people interested in it, I think we should be looking towards the next steps as what else could the CDM be used for. But I think really the key is to get people interested, to get people involved, and to get people starting to adopt this. So more publicity around what the CDM can offer in terms of sort of cost savings on the sort of the operational side. We several people have sort of touched on the impact on regulatory reporting and the potential optimization and sort of automation of reg reporting if the CDM were widely adopted. That obviously has a large cost element to industry participants, and I think that's something where when adopting something like this is clearly going to involve costs for the institution doing it. One of the main ways of getting people involved will be to highlight the savings which you should be looking at if it were adopted and if it became something which was widely adopted, in addition to all of the things we discussed earlier around it enabling the electronification of the markets, sort of moving on and adopting sort of distributed ledger technology and solutions involving that. All of this, it's only going to be possible if people are aware of the benefits, they understand that, they can put a number on that as far as their institution goes. Then I think it's something which will be viewed very positively.
Regulatory reporting is, of course, a very important topic, but also, as you said, a very costly exercise with all the different regimes that are specific to different asset classes with more or less cumbersome requirements. And clearly, it seems that the CDM here has some potential. Gerard, in terms of next steps, from a broader perspective, what would you like to see?
Yeah, I think we have to continue extending the different trade scenarios that are out there. So what we've done so far is a very basic model. We need to continue that, expanding the development across a number of different trade scenarios that are out there currently. And then along with that, we obviously need to extend the whole life cycle that goes with all of those trade scenarios as well. So there are a number of elements that haven't been touched upon yet. So we need to look at that. And I believe, again, keep close integration with. There are already a number of developments out there that are already using digital assets, potential for digital currencies, tokenization of collateral, or obviously using distributed ledger technology. So we have to keep close in the pace of that development as well, to ensure that the whole community is moving at the same pace and using the same common standards, because that will ultimately lead to mass adoption and reducing the costs and the barriers for everybody to get involved. So I think we've got to broaden the aspect and broaden the reach to clients as well.
Yes, that's important, I think, in particular looking at digital assets or some of the adoption scenarios or use cases that we have been observing over the last few years, which have been accelerating as well. And it seems that the lack of common standards there is one of the technical operational obstacles to the adoption. Paul, from your perspective, what would you like to see as next steps following this initial phase?
Yeah, I'm broadly in agreement with Andy, Andrea, and Gerard. So far, we've only really modeled the most generic transaction, which is a fixed term, fixed rate repo. So I think to move forward, it has to come together as a community, work with entities such as the ERCC Best Practices Committee, because there are other more complicated transactions that we need to deal with. And there's differences in messaging, but there's also differences in the mechanics of some of these trades, how firms deal with them. But also, I think SFTR has highlighted also that there's different booking practices in different firms. So the books and records are handled differently. So it's standardization across the board. But looking at some of the specific challenges, I mean, obviously there's talks about shaping and certainly looking at open trade life cycles. There's a few different routes to handle those trades. So just from a mechanical point of view, how does that work? And then how does that work with the messaging? So it's all kind of, again, coming back to standardization. And there's also other issues to do with even different data providers sending out different messages at different times about how you handle new issue bonds and the coupons on those. So it's all just standardization. So as I said before, the more standardization, the more we can automate.
That is an important point. Standardization as an enabler for automation. And I think this is where the CDM can play an important role. Rudy, from your perspective, can you share with us what the ISDA CDM development roadmap looks like and what the focus is going to be on your side over the next 12 to 18 months?
Thank you. Well, I think the overall vision will be certainly to continue this journey and across association now to look into the value proposition of CDM to represent financial transactions and their life cycles. This will be done through collaboration with market participants, financial institutions, fintechs, regtechs, and some of the key areas that I think we are pertinent. Because we are driven very much by pain points of recognizing the broad scope of CDM opportunity. So we want to continue looking into the transformation for regulatory projects, regulatory regulation coming online is one. Second one is looking at the CDM embedded as in a data foundation for market infrastructure. That's the second one. The third one is we touched on it, is to aid the the necessary standardizations of digitized legal documents, and we mentioned that a little bit during this discussions, and perhaps collateral management will keep coming back to the table because it's pertinent for all our efforts and for the life cycle of financial transactions. So that's kind of perhaps for a pertinent area that we think will be helpful to look into.
Thanks, Rudy. So Nick, from your perspective, you've already heard so many different suggestions. What is it that you would like to see as next steps?
Well, I feel I suppose recapping what the other panelists have been saying. So I think there were, I've kind of captured 4 areas there. The one being to, complete the foundation work and the key conditions for product and process. So we've made a good start, but there's still a number of other elements to fold into the CDM. Community-wise, we need to kind of further, build the group and socialise the work and continue to extend the collaborative engagements as well. I think we've got a great community. You heard from the attendees today and the panelists in terms of how rich that group is. But it'd be good to see some more inputs into that as well to strengthen the outcomes of the work. And then internally, then many of us are just looking at the business cases and figuring where this is going to land at the onset. The reconciliation, the reporting, the clearing, settlement, new product. So those feature points are going to be important for us to explore as well to get this across the line. And then finally, really I think to explore the opening the channels for the other formats as well. We've made a great start with Fix, but there are a number of other sort of components as well that we may want to fold into that and understand what the appropriate sequence of those activities is as well. As we complete the foundation work.
Great, thank you, Nick. So clearly, looking ahead, the CDM is able already to help join the dots, provides data consistency, and it has the potential to further drive the digitization agenda, not only for repo and bonds, as we've heard, collateral management being one of the areas that offers the opportunity to further collaborate as a cross-cutting theme. But we also heard about digitizing legal agreements, and importantly, regulatory reporting with ever-changing requirements, where the CDM can play an important role. But one aspect that seems to be of particular importance is the community aspect, to mutualize costs, work together on and agreeing on common standards, and hence creating an incentive for adoption. And I think this is one important aspect. Now I'm conscious of time. Thank you very much for your contributions. We will now open the floor to questions. So I can see that we have actually received a number of questions. So one question here is in relation to trading venues. Mentioning that trading venues have been providing solutions and pushing standardization for years. What would make us think that the industry will adopt a single common standard now?
I'll jump in and take this one. Yeah, I mean, obviously there is a degree of standardization within every platform, but looking across the street, different platforms are doing their own different things. I must say I've probably been relatively pleased since my trading days where I was getting killed for half a basis point. The market is much more collaborative now than it was before. And I'm sure there's people on this call who would recognize what I'm talking about, but generally there are a lot of clients and dealers who will step aside from their own motivations to make money or run their businesses and are looking at the greater good of the market, and it will not take on solutions that unless there is a good degree of unanimity. So I agree with the skepticism, but I am actually pleasantly surprised from the interactions that I've been involved in. So hopefully that's going to put us in the right direction.
Great, thank you. Another question that relates to the role of the association collaboration during the project and looking ahead, and the CDM governance arrangements. And I'm happy to respond to this one. We have been working very closely together with ISDA and ISLA on the CDM project, but we also signed a joint letter last year where we commit to enabling a digital future, and promoting common standards is one of the pillars of the agreement. And clearly the CDM is going to be one area where we're going to be collaborating more closely. And we're hopeful that we will be making further announcements, or one announcement in particular in the next few weeks, that will address precisely the question on the collaboration. Then there's another question on the timelines. to have the full scope of repo products, including collateral management aspects by tri-party and other lifecycle events such as rolls, extensions, and early expirations. And that's something that we have, I think, partially addressed within the panel discussion. Clearly, there seems to be an opportunity in some areas in particular, as some of you mentioned, when it comes to open repos and those lifecycle events there to address those. So at this point in time, we don't have a, let's say, a timeline that is set in stone, but clearly the points mentioned here are the ones that we are considering for a future phase. Right, I think we have actually one additional question here left. And this one relates to raising awareness on by way of promotion. What else can ICMA do in that regard? We've heard from the panel discussion already that hackathons, for example, have been a very good way of engaging with hackathons that have been sponsored by Barclays together with ISDA, in which ICMA has collaborated as well. I will turn it to our panelists. Are there any other suggestions from your side? What should be done in terms of promotion or raising awareness on the CDM?
Perhaps I can provide additional colors on how we proceeded in ISDA. For the past few years, it's very much boots on the ground and outreach efforts, speaking to the many whether across trade associations, whether to fintech, to RegTech, to regulatory authorities as well, to present the value proposition of the CDM, but moreover to understand what are those difficulties, those opportunities for a more efficient processes. So that's a kind of efforts. In addition to, I think you mentioned kind of hackathon, but generally. By looking at entry points, identifying what are the specific areas within the bank that one could look like to say, well, the CDM can help you to resolve some of your reconciliation challenges between your different systems, or the CDM can help you to better manage your reporting processes, or the CDM can help accelerate or resolve some of the control breaks that you observe as part of some of your settlement, or simply the CDM can help accelerate your implementation when you talk about innovative technology. So it's very much an outreach effort as much as possible, as well as concrete demonstrations of the CDM. So as well as building the model, what we are looking into with the help of REGnosys, for example, is that looking at simple implementations, reference implementation of CDM, looking at, okay, how do you calculate the floating amount, etc.
Right, I think that's an important aspect, and I think this is where the cross-industry collaboration, again, is, I think, key and central to the success of the CDM, based on industry consensus as we develop this model further. I'm conscious of time, and I think with this, we can now wrap up the panel discussions and the Q&As. Thank you very much. And I will now hand over to my colleague, Andy Hill, for the concluding remarks.
Thank you, Gabriel. First of all, I would like to thank everybody involved in today's event, our demonstrators and panelists, but also Gabriel and Rowan for putting this together, Leanne and the ICMA events team, as well as you, our audience today. I hope that you found this informative and stimulating. Extending the CDM to cash bonds and repo is a key strategic priority for ICMA. As we have heard several times today, the digitization and automation of the capital markets are not just requisites for greater efficiencies, but they create opportunities. Establishing common standards for data representation is key to achieving both of these objectives. And this is what the CDM does. To echo Martin's opening comments, if we can speak a common digital language across all markets, instruments, and transaction types, we not only avoid fragmentation and waste, but we open a door to a new wave of innovation and possibilities. Whether this is in facilitating trading, settlement, reconciliation, payments and processes, risk management, regulatory reporting, or data capture and analysis. As we have heard today, this is equally pertinent to banks, asset managers, trading venues, settlement systems, clearing houses, various fintech solutions, and even market regulators. In our day-to-day work, it is not always possible to look up and see what's directly ahead of us, let alone what could be lying on the horizon. The CDM project has forced us at ICMA to do just that. And we believe that this initiative, in the medium to long term, will provide great value to our members and the wider industry. It is a journey, but it is one that is moving rapidly, and we encourage you to be a part of it. So if you or your organizations are not already engaged in the CDM project in one form or another, we encourage you to reach out to us after this event and to be a part of it. Thank you.